So, Dan, you were then talking about the synergies between the wine and the barrel and kind of what that relationship looks like. Looking at this card here, what can you tell us about the wine that's actually in the barrel?
Well, we use these cards to keep track of which 60 gallons specifically is in which barrel at what point. You know, winemaking is it's a huge organizational endeavor. And by this card, we're able to ascertain the vineyard, the block, the clone, the yeast strain that we use to ferment this wine, all of the barrels that the wine has been in throughout its time here in the cellar, how we've been feeling about this wine in terms of a rating throughout the course of the year, and any additions and when those additions were made are all represented on this card.
So you were talking about moving wine from different barrels. What's the reason for that?
There's a few reasons. Initially, when wine goes into a barrel, it is still fairly cloudy, so there is a lot of sediment that sinks down to the bottom of the barrel, and after a certain amount of time, it's really great to get the nice, clean wine off of what's down there, and get rid of that. The other reason is that not all barrels are created equal. Some are newer than others. They contribute more new oak. The flavors from all the different cooperages can be different. So it's really nice to be able to play a little bit of a game of musical chairs with all these wines and really dial in the oak to exactly how we want it. 12 months or a year in a brand new French oak barrel would just be entirely too much for a Pinot Noir. So all barrels are moved typically twice, maybe 3 times if you think that the wine needs it over the course of the year.
So 2 things that you were talking about. 1, making wine is a huge organizational endeavor.
Absolutely.
And 2, you brought up the game of musical chairs. When you decide to move a wine from different barrels, how do you decide which wine is going to go in which barrels? Like, do you know what flavor profile you're kind of looking for, or what's kind of the thought behind it?
Most of those decisions are all palate based. The winemaking team, we're deciding that this particular wine is telling us it needs more oak, less oak, a different flavor profile from a different cooperage, and then we're making the decisions based on that and our 30 years of experience being here in the Dundee Hills.
I mean, that really makes sense. So then you were also talking about yeast. Obviously, making wine, it does require some type of yeast to kind of keep that fermentation going.
Absolutely.
What are the different strains, and what does it give to a wine?
There are hundreds of different strains of yeast that are capable of fermenting all sorts of different grapes. The main purpose of using different yeast strains for us here at the winery is to really create another layer of complexity within those wines. The same exact fruit fermented with 2 different yeast strains takes on 2 different flavor profiles. So we can really build more complex wines by utilizing different yeast strains on the same fruit.
That's amazing. And then, is there more of the synergy aspect between different vineyard blocks or different clones even, that you're like, oh, this clone really needs to be in this barrel because blah?
I wouldn't say those things are totally clonal based. It's derived from a lot of factors, how the fruit comes in that particular vintage. But I would say really more of the overriding aspect would be the vineyard itself. Over 30 years here, we've really identified which cooperages we think work well with which vineyards, and we try to really dial that in pretty closely during harvest.
That's absolutely amazing. How long typically does wine move from barrel to barrel? How long is it kept on oak?
Our high-end wines are kept on oak for about 11 months. So most of a full year, we need that other month to really, put the wines through their other processes to get them ready for bottling. But somewhere in the 10 to 11 month range is typically the standard up here. We don't really over vintage anything all that much, Pinot being a fairly delicate varietal. And most of these wines spend, 4 to 5 months in each respective barrel.
Yeah, and over vintaging is just keeping it in the barrel.
It's keeping a wine, past. Yes.
Okay. Just making sure. So then, after it's been in barrel, it is then put where before bottling?
Well, we're going to make our decision on blending. So this is only 60 gallons of wine, which ultimately is about 25 cases. We need a little bit more than that for some of these bottlings, so we make our decisions. We find out, which barrels are really blending well, nicely with one another, what's going to make our best blends. We'll create that on a small scale, and then we'll recreate that in a larger tank out in the cellar to get these wines ready for bottle.
Can you please share your beautiful baseball analogy?
When it comes to blending, you often see that as the wines are rated individually, this might be a 4.5, this might be a 5. Just because it has a particular rating doesn't mean that all of those barrels will come together to create the best blend. My dad always used to tell me sometimes the 9 best baseball players won't make the best baseball team, and wines are very much like that. So even though we assess these barrels on an individual scale, when it gets time for blending, all of those blends are put together, and we're judging the wine based on the blend, not its individual components.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
You are very welcome.
This is, again, incredible.
We sure hope so.
Yeah.